Thank you. I call Fletcher Tabato.
Thank you for the opportunity, sir. It galls me to hear the contribution from the last speaker. Let's put this in perspective. She quoted all these fantastic tourism numbers and spoke of growth in tourism in New Zealand. And as a member of the House who grew up in tourism and who is our tourism spokesperson now, in terms of the numbers that were quoted, you can't fault the statistics. But the implication that the government had anything to do with it with regard to the appropriation debates that we're having now is misleading in the extreme. It is farcical that the member would imply, and that's all she's doing, she can only imply that this government had a hand in tourism growth in this country, because it is patently untrue. Mr. Speaker, the reality is tourism around the world and here in New Zealand is growing, and it's a fantastic thing to see. And thank goodness for this government who does nothing, just sits there and cherry picks something to talk about in the House. They're not talking about dairy anymore, are they? They daren't talk about what's happening to the dairy market anymore. They were a couple of years ago when it was going strong and they had nothing to do with that either. But now they're talking about tourism like they had something to do with it. And to contrast the contribution from the previous member, the take from the government in terms of GST revenue alone nearly totalled $1 billion. Government spent approximately $300 million, nearly $400 million on funding Tourism New Zealand and other projects, which is, I don't know, shall we go so far as to say commendable? But then they talk to New Zealand about the Tourism and Infrastructure Fund like it's going to solve the problems that regional New Zealand especially are experiencing with regards to capacity issues with the tourism numbers that we're experiencing right now. Not only will 7 to 15 new public toilets built over the next 4 years do nothing to help New Zealand's severe infrastructure shortage in terms of coping with these tourism numbers. In fact, what we are hearing now from our tourism participants, the industry itself, is that unless there's an order of magnitude, I don't know, a greater investment, and we're talking big numbers, Mr. Speaker, not $12 million over 4 years, unless there's something substantial, actually our brand, New Zealand brand, is going to be affected negatively. Our brand's going to go backwards, and that will affect our tourism dollar take. And the government is literally doing nothing about it except coming up with a $12 million fund and spinning it like they're solving New Zealand's problems. It's just completely unacceptable. So, with regard to monetary policy and the juxtaposition we have with regard to that and the appropriations debate today, let's get real about the situation. The Reserve Bank Governor has come to the limits of his power. No longer is he wielding a blunt axe. Actually, just about anything he does can be damned if he does it and damned if he doesn't. Because the problem we're experiencing, and excuse the pun, the flip side of the coin, is that this government's fiscal policy is bereft of ideas, bereft of forethought, and is simply reactionary in nature and not even sufficient at that. And the reason I say that is if you look at spending on health, spending on the police, spending on education, just things, the big things that come to mind as I make this contribution, those figures, although the money number has gone up, and it's hard for some on that side of the House to appreciate the very, very big difference, although those numbers have gone up, in relation to the number of people living in New Zealand, Mr. Speaker, those real numbers have fallen. This government is spending less on education, less on health, and less on, I think there were like 19 or 20 appropriations sections, and I think 18 of them went backwards in real terms, sir. So that is the legacy of this government. They're not reacting well enough. And as for the previous member to make a statement around debt going down, she didn't specify what. She said debt. When the last government left this House and that government took over, debt was around $8 billion. $8 billion. a big number in the average Kiwi's head. But, sir, that number has gone beyond 80 billion and is screaming towards 100 billion. That is the legacy of this national government. That is the acuity, that is the responsible money managers that we're supposed to believe they call themselves. That is their legacy. It has grown more than tenfold. And in anyone's books, that is huge, Mr. Speaker. And with regard to debt, that is completely unacceptable. I really wanted to talk about only two things in my contribution, but the previous speaker got me fired up, as those on that side of the House will want to do. And I just wanted to point out, sir, that the budget, these appropriations debates, highlighted the fact there are 2 points. The first is this government has no idea where regional New Zealand is. And the second is they have been asleep at the wheel, for 8 years over the Auckland housing market. Just unbelievable. Actually, it's 2 points, but it pretty much covers the entire New Zealand economy. Just ignorant of what's going on around them in the bulk of the country. It staggers the mind, it truly staggers the mind that some of those MPs are only just realising now, as is the New Zealand public, as the polling figures come out, that New Zealanders are only just realising now that the government has no idea what it's doing, it has no plan, it's reacting poorly from case to case, and the plan that is working, which isn't even a byline anymore, it was the big statement around the last budget, if I remember rightly, the plan that is working, well, there was no plan, and nobody understood what it was because the government wouldn't and couldn't tell us. With regard to the housing crisis, sir, I think it's fair to say that unless you're over what I've coined the rich line now, it's no longer about middle-class New Zealanders. You've got to be rich to live in Auckland, basically. And let's put that into perspective. Principals in New Zealand, and they are in the top 10% bracket of income earners in New Zealand. So principals, top income earners, top 10%, were told by the Prime Minister they'd have to downgrade their expectations when it comes to buying a house in Auckland if they wanted to live there. That's the top 10% earners in this country being told to downgrade their expectations by the Prime Minister, and a group of people who are doing nothing to address the issue of the housing crisis in Auckland. And it's spreading. It's spreading like a virus. Down into Hamilton, up Whangarei, down into the electorate of Rotorua. Prices are getting out of kilter with reality. It'd be awesome if house prices were going up because there was increases in New Zealanders wanting to live in Rotorua, and there were a huge amount of growth of jobs there, and normal economic factors were contributing to growth, which was leading to increase in house prices, but that's not the fact. We're getting that Auckland market coming down and speculating in the local housing economy. It's distorting reality, and the very real nature of the problem is that rents are becoming unmanageable for the average Rotorua household who don't own their own house. And more, Kiwis can't even get into a house, Mr. Speaker, and that is the legacy of this national government. That is what is happening. No matter what they say, no matter what these ministers say, they are failing at doing their job. The government's lack of action, its short-term focus, is literally killing the future of New Zealand and the people in it. Sir, we have watched our economy being propped up by poor immigration policy, a short-term itis fix to a long-term problem, and National is reluctant to do anything about it. And these appropriations, this budget, has done nothing to address those issues. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Sarah Dowie.
Well, thank you.